Oh, and today we are going to learn how to read a datasheet. We're doing this in conjunction with Octopart because it just makes sense. They are an aggregator of different distributors in the electronics and electrical engineering industry, and each one of their parts has datasheets, and they have a great way to find datasheets. It's very consistent. We did an entire video about that. It makes a whole lot of sense. Today, we're going to primarily use the PIC 18F 14K50 datasheet because we use that in our embedded C tutorial, and that just makes a lot of sense. Also, it's very long and thorough, so we'll have a lot of examples to look at, but there's actually a couple of things that it doesn't do. So for those, we'll use some other data sheets. So we'll start by looking up the PIC 18F 14K50, which is quite the mouthful. And it pops up right here, and I don't really care about the footprint at the moment, so I'll just open this data sheet. So I really do like this in browser viewer, so it can give me just a quick view of, okay, is this what I want? Yes, it is. But then I typically download it so that I can open it up in my viewer, because that is where it is, where I can use the search tool to find things. So we have that popped up now. And let's jump right into this and start going over the different parts of what's in this data sheet. So you have your first page, and it's just, hey, this is what it is. Now, this is the most oft skipped part of the data sheet. And I don't know if I've ever read even 20% of what is on the legalese page. At the same time, I feel constrained to tell you it's incredibly important, because even though most people, such as myself, skip over it all the time, it does give you a lot of information about where you can use it, where you can't use it, what microchip, in this case, is willing to be liable for, which in this case, it's actually mostly saying what they're not liable for. It's talking about trademarks. When can you use their trademarks in there? When can you not? Legal stuff, as an electrical engineer, I'm biased. Legal stuff is terrible. I hate it, but it is the world we live in. So it's probably best to at least give it a glance over so you know what you're doing, particularly when it comes to like code breaking or using their brand. If you, let's say you create a product and you say, hey, this product uses this brand, well, make sure that that's legal and they're not going to sue you over that, because nobody wins but the lawyers when that happens. So best to avoid it first. So there we are. It's all of the legal stuff. Now that that painful stuff is out of the way, we come to what I find is the most enjoyable and interesting and important part of the datasheet when you are looking for what you want. So this is basically the overview. In this case, it says, hey, it's a 20-pin USB flash microcontroller with nanowatt XLP technology. Okay, good for you. But then it tells me, what are the USB features? What can I get out of the CPU? What sort of peripherals am I dealing with? How many analog features do I have? In this 1 to 2 pages, usually, you can find so much information about exactly what, in summary, that part can do. When you look at parts on a website, you typically need to take the summaries and explanations with a grain of salt, because a lot of times it's written by the marketing team or maybe with the engineering team or something along those lines. And I'm not saying that it's untrustworthy, but sometimes they don't know what's important. And sometimes the engineers are just like, yeah, that looks good, and don't review it the way they should. But data sheets, this is more of the domain of engineers. This is where you're more likely to have in-depth, detailed, and useful information. So I really like going here. So you can go on a website and say, oh, this looks like it's exactly what I want. But then go into the data sheet, look at this overview to make sure that you actually are getting into the right thing and you're getting what you need for your purposes. So really love the overview. I love summaries, good summaries. Perfect. So moving on, after that, you typically find the table of contents. On this one, you have some pinouts first, but let's jump to the table of contents and go over that really quick, and then we'll go back to the pin assignments. So with the table of contents, sometimes I'll almost use that as another summary of the part and also what's contained in it. So as you look at this, you can see, oh, hey, there's timer 0, 1, 2, and 3 modules. So that means that this has 4 timer modules. Do I have any details about that? Not really, but it gives me a little bit more information. Also tells me exactly where I can find them. Where this is more important is if for some reason you print out this 420-page document, you are going to need this table of contents. And in the unfortunate scenario where this is not searchable, you're also going to need the table of contents. However, most data sheets nowadays are searchable. That being said, that brings its own pros and cons because it can be incredibly helpful or it can be incredibly frustrating because they might use a special character that you don't put into the search, or they might use a trademark for something so you can't find what you're looking for even though it's there. So you kind of have to use both. I maybe rely too much on search. So if there is something you're like, I cannot find it in the search, come back to the table of contents. It'll tell you everything that you need to do. And frankly, other times, if you type in something, oh, I need timer, you put in timer and 3,000 results come out, not very useful. So again, having a searchable datasheet is fantastic, it's wonderful, but it also needs to be combined often with a table of contents so that you can actually find it and know roughly in the area that you are looking for. So that's the table of contents. It's important. Don't forget it. Let's jump back up to the pin assignments because again, depending on the datasheet, sometimes a pin assignment is first, sometimes table of contents, whatever. But the pin assignments are pretty useful because in this case, even though these are both 20 pin devices, sometimes, and I actually have not gone through and verified with this particular one, but sometimes the pin assignments aren't exactly the same in terms of what they have on each pin. And that can be a problem that we were helping somebody. They'd switched from one package to another and thought that all they had to do was reassign the pins and then they would all be the exact same because this one pin had a dual function and that one pin did not have a dual function. One of the functions had actually gotten switched to another. So it was a double switch. Anyway, it was a relatively easy thing to find once we looked for it, but we were helping this guy and he just had no idea what was going on. And that's what had happened. So even as you look at this, pin 17 on the DIP package is VUSB, but pin 14 is the VUSB on the QFN package. So again, figure out what you're going to use. It's going to pop up. It's very, very important. It's the small details that kill you sometimes. So pin diagrams, super, super important. Make sure that you are using the appropriate one for the package you have figured out and you have decided to use. So in this case, after the table of contents, you get a little bit more almost marketing material, I think, kind of core features, says what's great, all that stuff, whatever. That's important, but I'm not going to worry about it too much. The thing that I do like is that here on page 12, in this particular case, you get the block diagram. So this is where things get interesting because a lot of times you just use a part and sort of like with an op amp, you don't care what's going on inside. You just know what the inputs are doing, you know what the output's doing, and you connect it. You don't really worry about it. But sometimes when you're either pushing the envelope or you are doing something strange or it's acting strange and you can't figure out why, you want to know what's going on internally so you can understand exactly how it'll perform. So it's these block diagrams, and sometimes you'll actually get the more detailed block diagrams that will help you understand exactly what a GPIO type is. It might be something where, oh, this is an open collector GPIO. I thought it was a push-pull GPIO. Great, now I know why it's not acting the way that I was expecting it to act. So I find the source block diagram to be incredibly useful on those rare but very frustrating times when things aren't acting the way I'm expecting it to according to the rest of the documentation. This is almost like the core source material that you can go back to say, oh, it didn't say this over there, but now I know what's going on. And it's also a visual representation versus a text, and that is beneficial for some people. So don't overlook the block diagrams because that can be great. After the block diagram, we get into what is kind of the equivalent for this datasheet to be the application notes. Now, microcontrollers are a lot more complicated than other circuits out there, so they actually have provided completely separate documents for their application notes, but they will provide subsections like this that'll say, this is how you use, in this example, the quartz crystal. This is how you get an oscillator timer for your microcontroller. And then it'll go and say, this is how you use the UART. This is how you use the SPI. And it'll kind of give you those very precise and exact things that you need to do. So it's kind of giving you the building blocks that you can use to build your own custom application. And so again, on simpler devices, if you have something using an op amp again as an example, your application note is going to be simple enough that they'll put it inside the datasheet itself. But in this one, if we search application notes, it actually takes us to a spot where it says, for oscillator design assistance, reference the following application notes. And then it says multiple application notes that you can go and use if you want to use the oscillator in a unique or interesting way. So that is kind of one of the fun things there, is that a lot of this stuff is scalable. It just depends on what device you're using and how complicated it gets. So even though the PIC microcontroller datasheets are incredibly long and detailed, there are a couple of things that it doesn't actually show very well. And so I pulled up a CUI Devices power relay datasheet. It's for the PR9 series. I pulled it up randomly. And I wanted to use it as an example for a few other things that, again, aren't shown in the other one quite as well. And one of the things is the difference between recommended and maximum values. So as we jump on here, you can see that right up here at the top, you're given some typical values for the coil voltage, the coil resistance, and then it gives you the minimum operating voltage and the maximum release voltage and the maximum coil power and all of those things like that. And that's kind of the standard. This is what you should design for. But then as you go deeper into datasheets, and I love datasheets that'll have this, they'll break it into minimum, typical, and max, and then just have the units over there. This is one of the things where the datasheet will tell you, this is kind of what you should plan on. It should be around 5 volts, but sometimes it needs 5.2 volts to do this, or sometimes it doesn't release until 4.8 volts. And so even though it has its target, they also give you that maximum and that minimum to let you understand that there's a range there. You can't expect perfection. And the better, the higher quality part you get, the tighter those tolerances are, so that it acts more in the way that's expected. But I mean, it's real life. So nothing is exactly at 5 volts. There's no relay that will exactly open exactly where it says and then close exactly where it says it's going to. It's going to be a range. And that is where it's important to see what that range is. Okay, and moving on from there, we can see the mechanical drawings. It tells you exactly how big this is, and also gives you the wiring diagram, which is pretty important, and then the recommended PCB layout. And it's kind of a funny story. This is quite important to have the footprint and the recommended PCB layout figured out. For one thing, the PCB layout, not such a big deal with the relay as long as it fits in there. But let's say you're doing some sort of RF design with an antenna, and it says you have to have your inductor right here. It has to have this size of width and thickness of the trace, and it can't have any 90-degree curves, and it has to be just like this to the antenna and all of that sort of stuff. It can be very, very particular. But even then, it's nice to have the recommended PCB layout, because then you're not the one getting the part and measuring it with a ruler and figuring out exactly how it is on the PCB, because that would be a pain. And make sure you understand the units and make sure you know what's going on here. Kind of a funny story, an embarrassing story, but the first time I ordered an electronic part off the internet, I didn't look at the measurements too well, so I thought I was buying some sort of breadboardable MOSFET, and it showed up, and I bought 10 of them, and they were the SOT23 packages, which, if you've ever seen those, they're incredibly small. I remember just grabbing it and thinking, what in the world? And I looked at the picture, I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what it is, but I don't know what I was doing. It was a great learning experience. It was something where I learned, okay, go check out the mechanical drawing, go make sure that the size is actually what you're expecting, find out what the pitches of a breadboard is, which now I know that, but at that time I was in college, I was an idiot. I didn't know. So don't make the same mistake I did. Look at this information, make sure that you know what you're talking about. Okay, and one thing that I would like to show that I think that this Ohmite datasheet shows it the best is sometimes a part is rated to perform in one way, but if it's in a different environment, particularly a hot environment, there are deratings that show how that component reacts. So I pulled up this non-inductive bulk ceramic slab resistor. So this is basically a power resistor. And since it's designed to handle large amounts of power, I knew that this was going to have that sort of information on it. And I was not disappointed, because as we come down and we look at it, we can see the derating of this resistor. So with these resistors, they're given a rated power. And let's just say, hey, this can go up to 10 watts just to keep the math easy. Well, up to 40 degrees Celsius, they can successfully handle 10 watts. But then as you get hotter and hotter and hotter, they can handle less and less and less. And as you can see with the AS series, by 230 degrees, it can't handle any. And at about 150 degrees Celsius, it can only handle what, in our case, since I arbitrarily chose 10 watts, it would only be able to handle 4 watts of the original 10 watts that it originally said that it could handle. So these derating curves are incredibly important. That's actually one of those specialty things, particular to resistors. And that is not only true with resistors, you can also see it with transistors. But whenever you think that you're going to be outside of the normally accepted 0 to 40 degrees Celsius, and I know people could disagree with that normal statement, but that's fairly normal, between 0 to 40 degrees Celsius, you should definitely check to see if there's any derating curve and make sure that you size your components properly to handle anything that goes above that. And it should be noted that if you say, hey, this is going to be in 40-degree Celsius temperatures, it'll be fine. Remember that it's going to be creating its own heat. And if it's in something enclosed, it could be much, much hotter than 40 degrees Celsius out there. So that's another topic right there. But I do want to make sure that as you're looking at these deratings, you're not just thinking of, hey, it's 40 degrees Celsius in open air. You might be 40 degrees Celsius, but then in something that's trapping that heat and making it even hotter in that direct spot. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these deratings. Okay, there's another thing that none of these have anything to say about because it's MSDS information. So even though a lot of these components don't have a whole lot to say because you only have to worry about RoHS compliance or things like that, the problem is that sometimes you are using chemicals to do your soldering. You're using your flux, you're using your cleaning stuff, you're using your solder that sometimes has lead in it. And don't lick the lead, stuff like that. You do need to look at this MSDS information to see, is this going to explode on you? Is this going to kill you? Do you need some sort of protection from this stuff? A lot of times, I think, especially when we're hobbyists, we'll ignore that stuff and think, I'm not going to deal with enough of it to hurt me. Well, maybe not. But at least make a good decision on whether or not you're going to be hurt. And if you're doing anything on a commercial or a larger scale, you very much better take this into account, or you're going to be in a lot of trouble if you're exposing workers to toxic chemicals for lengthy periods of time. That's terrible for a lot of different reasons. So check out the MSDS information on anything that you are purchasing. And, again, most components aren't going to have any issues like that, but it's safe to review all of the data sheets, make sure that there isn't anything in these devices, but particularly in the chemicals you use, make sure that you're being safe and you're protecting not only yourself, but those around you, whether that be family or other employees, employers, whatever. I hope that you will depend more on them and pull out some important information to make your life easier. I want to say that I'm so grateful to Octopart, our friend of CircuitBread, that has allowed us to use their platform to look up these data sheets and to provide this information to you. If you like this video, give it a like, subscribe to this channel, and we will catch you in the next one. Take care.
Hey, I hope this tutorial was helpful. Did you know that CircuitBread.com also has more useful engineering content? In addition to the tutorials, textbooks, tools, and other things, we have dozens of EE FAQs that explain quick, standalone concepts that are helpful for electrical engineers. Go check them out.